specific or special or unique knowledge about the inner workings of Twitter?
Nothing beyond the Twitter files and what I read in the media.
So essentially, your responses to the questions here today were your own opinion and pure conjecture.
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I try to base them on what we know from the Twitter files.
Well, but you said that you don't have any specific or unique knowledge of Twitter, but you spoke as if you did. You were asked very specific questions about Twitter's, the way Twitter functions and the decision-making that they make, but yet you don't have any unique or special knowledge about Twitter and have never worked for them. And so this is only just your opinion, would you say, as a Twitter account user?
No, I've come to give legal analysis based on facts that are in the public domain, and I was really referring to what I was asked about the Twitter
Reclaiming
files.
my time, legal analysis is another word for opinion.
I would think there's some distinction, but yeah, it ultimately is an opinion. But I believe the question to me was based on what the Twitter files show, and that was my reading of the Twitter files.
Right, and again, that's another way of describing your opinion being offered, which was represented as unique and special facts, which you don't possess. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Lady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Rice.
Mr. Chairman, before he goes, may I be recognized for unanimous consent?
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, gentleman's recognized for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a Republican staff report from the Committee on the Judiciary dated November 4th, 2022, entitled FBI Whistleblowers, What Their Disclosures Indicate, and ask that the committee also provide a copy to Mr. Goldman so that he might be able to review all the staff notes compiled in the report.
Without objection, so ordered. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California.
I thank the chairman. Dr. Turley, let me just go back. How many times have you testified before Congress on behalf of all of us? Dozens and dozens and dozens over my 22 years.
I've testified both as a Republican and Democrat witness over 50 times, approaching 60.
So, to use a term of art, you're an expert witness when it comes to evaluating the Constitution and a great many laws and their interpretation.
That's how I've been called. That's why I've been called to this.
And you teach in that role.
I do.
Okay. And I want to thank you because in my 22 years, I have seen you representing both sides many times and normally treated with the respect that your opinions based on your readings or your scholarly work are generally respected by both sides of the aisle, and I thank you for that. You know, this committee is rightfully being talked about, subcommittee about as weaponization of government, but I just want to clear up a couple of points. The previous operation known as Operation Choke Point, where government limited people's ability actually to have bank accounts, that would be weaponization by government, a decision by government to affect commerce, correct?
Well, it certainly affects commerce. There's no question about that.
Okay, and it's outside what one would think the administrative state has a right to do in any sense. Our liberties include that right to have commerce not impinged by, based on our political views by our government. So, in a sense, the weaponization of DOJ isn't new, is it? It predates this administration and even the previous one.
No, that's true. Some of the darkest chapters in our history have come from the Department of Justice losing that independence and objective element that they pride themselves on. And that goes back to the Palmer raids and even before then. And whenever the DOJ and the FBI has lost its way in that sense, it has come at a great cost to the country as well as the department.
Well, and speaking of lost their way, back in 2010, 2012, with the IRS's targeting of conservative groups headed by Lois Lerner, that certainly limited the free speech of those organizations when they were denied their ability to hold themselves as not-for-profits, correct?
That had serious free speech implications.
So when we look at the weaponization of government, we should not limit it to three-letter words over at DOJ, but in fact, we need to look at government broadly and how it might impinge free speech or our rights to simply have our liberties. And to that extent, we've covered a lot of the FBI, and I think that's important, and I'm mentioning the IRS, but behind there, I have a concern about the FBI. Ms. Parker, I've got to go to you. Is that something that you think represents the neutralism of simply being law enforcement for the FBI, basically to kneel in support of Black Lives Matter?
That would not be deemed appropriate. They're wearing their official FBI ballistic vests, and although, like we've mentioned, FBI agents have the right to my First Amendment thoughts, but I am not at the liberty to express any of my political or social opinions while on the job. I know that in that instance they were guarding our national institutions and that we heard that they were saying that they were trying to de-escalate the situation, but in those pictures it appears that there are people smiling, clapping. It looked very far from de-escalation to me, but it is not appropriate to make any sort of potentially political or social statement while wearing your FBI ballistic vest on official duty. No, it is not appropriate.
In the decades I served in the Army, we were warned about when in uniform being involved in anything that appeared to pick sides, and certainly they picked a side there. I want to just close my questioning because we're going to be doing this probably for 2 years, and ask a question again, Mr. Turley. We have this question of government and what it's doing, but a lot of people are talking about how Twitter's a private company, Facebook's a private company, they're all private companies. Isn't it fair to say that from a standpoint of statutory and constitutional history, our government has clearly looked at entities which convey free speech, newspapers, radio, television, and has limited the concentration of power and the concentration of ownership in order to maintain, although private, an ability for all, or at least most, free speech to find an avenue? Isn't that the history that we're also going to have to look at when it's concentrated in just a few companies?
It is, and the fact is that much of our political dialogue now takes place on social media, which has replaced even telephones as a common form of communication. And that's why it is true that private companies can limit speech. But you have to keep in mind, these are communicative companies. These are closer to AT&T than they are Starbucks. And that raises a serious question in terms of not just looking at the government aspect of coordinating and targeting citizens for possible censorship, but the control of these companies over speech. And I think that people that sort of dismiss that are really losing the fact that this is now much of what is the marketplace of ideas. You know, the marketplace of ideas is now a digital marketplace, and it's controlled by these companies.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm so glad my friend from California just brought up Lois Lerner and the IRS and your comment, Professor Turley, that was troubling in terms of targeting a particular point of view, because, of course, that's not true. As we learned, the Inspector General, the TIGTA, deliberately focused only on conservative filters, even though he was presented with clear evidence that the filters were nonpartisan. There were liberal filters, lefty filters, conservative filters, Republican filters, Democratic filters, but they chose because they wanted to make a case that this was deliberate censorship and targeting by the IRS. Wasn't true. Never was true. False premise. And that's what I worry about right here on this committee. The premise is the FBI is tainted. The FBI is doing dirty work. It's got the hobnail boot of government on the necks of the American people who are simply trying to express themselves. Mr. Williams, you think the insurrectionists, thousands of them, who came here, many of them armed, that led to 5 deaths and the storming of the Capitol, to try to prevent the constitutional certification of the counting of the ballots for the President of the United States on January 6, 2021. You think that was nothing more than patriots who got a little carried away and they were just expressing their First Amendment rights, and the FBI shouldn't have been looking at it and certainly shouldn't be prosecuting people for it?
Well, certainly, sir. I believe almost 1,000, if not over 1,000 people have been charged with crimes in connection with that day. Several people have now been convicted by juries and also with findings that were affirmed by federal judges of seditious conspiracy. That's using force or threats to impede or delay the execution of laws of the United States.
So I guess I hear you saying we need to make a distinction between the expression of views, which is absolutely protected under the Constitution of the United States, First Amendment, and the use of violence to propound and propagate those views.
That is correct. So the First Amendment does not protect the use of violence.
Right. In fact, that's illegal.
Correct.
So when we talk about parents just going to school boards, trying to express their concerns, that's true. Many parents go. I was a parent with a kid in a school system. I was a card-carrying PTA member. I certainly testified now and then about the school budget or school issues, but I didn't threaten the lives or families of school board members. I didn't anonymously threaten violence or let it be known that I knew where they lived and that there'd be trouble. That's a different form of speech, isn't it?
Yes.
Would it be wrong for the FBI, under some circumstances, to be called in to look into that for the protection of elected school board members and, for that matter, active parents?
Both the FBI or state and local authorities who also have the ability to investigate violent crimes.
So do you think the FBI is the enemy of the American people?
I do not believe, in my experience, look, again, I was
Do you think the FBI ought to be defunded?
I do not believe the FBI should be defunded.
So, for example, if they were, the Tampa field office that infiltrated and spent 6 months embedded in a network of ransomware gag, Hive, and took it down. Hive is no longer functioning. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That is a very good thing. Look, I was a prosecutor and a senior executive of the Justice Department. Fighting crime is a good thing, and I think we can all agree on that.
I see. So they're not just, censoring free speech. They're actually doing some good things that protect the American people?
Yes.
Would you say that characterizes largely their mission and their function?
In my experience of working with the FBI and other federal law enforcement for years, absolutely, sir, that was my experience.
So we have to put everything in context here. We can't allow somebody who asserts they're up to no good because a particular agent or a couple of agents may be doing X, Y, and Z, not to taint the entire function and mission or personnel of the FBI. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement, correct.
And that goes to their other missions: cybersecurity protection, human sex trafficking, breaking up those rings, and for that matter, protecting us from domestic extremists who are propounding and using violence as a weapon to further their cause.
What is special about the FBI, sir, very quickly, is that unlike many other law enforcement agencies, it has both a counterterrorism element and a law enforcement element. Now, many people may think those are all one and the same, but those are actually two different functions. And so, yes, both of those help keep the American people safe.
I thank you, and I yield back.
I think the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Stewart, is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman and witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Turley. My condolences that you've had to sit through 60 of these, but thank you for being willing to do that. I look forward to hearing from all of you, but Mr. Chairman, I also look forward to hearing others who are key to this investigation. Christopher Wray, the Attorney General, former FBI Director Comey, former CIA Director Brennan. I hope we have a chance to hear from them as well. I want to share with you my first experience in this area. 2017, member of the House Intelligence Committee, after months and months of stonewalling, we were finally allowed to go to the FBI building and to read the FISA application on Carter Page. And after reading that application, it was very, very clear to me the FBI has lied to the FISA courts. The FBI has lied to Congress, and the FBI has lied to the American people. After that, I had a similar experience with some CIA documents and then other agencies. And the result of this is, when, Mr. Turley, you talk about losing the faith of the American people, if an FBI agent called me today and said they wanted to speak with me, I would never speak to them, regardless of the topic, without my attorney present. And by the way, Congress has to reauthorize 702 this year. And we are a long way away from getting the trust of confidence because of the subject we're talking about today. And we'll lose a valuable tool if many people are simply going to say, we won't give them that authority, they abuse it. I'd like to focus on the FBI abuse if I could. I'd remind you, Carter Page was an innocent American citizen. The FBI said he was a Russian spy. Turned out that was not true. In fact, turned out there was zero evidence that he was a Russian spy. And yet, the FBI IG went and looked at the FISA application, and this is what they found. And Mr. Williams, I hope you'll pay attention to this because I'm going to ask you a question about this. They found 17 significant errors, omissions. They found 51 wrong or unsupported factual assertions, including FBI lawyers who simply made up evidence and included it in the FISA application. Disgusted by this, I would suppose, the IG went and looked at random 25 other FISA applications and found significant inconsistencies and omissions in every one of them. Mr. Baker, you're a former FBI agent. Do you think that 17 omissions, 51 wrong assertions in a FISA application that, by the way, if you're going to get one right, don't you think the one that's targeting the President of the United States would be one you'd be particularly careful of? And yet they found that many omissions. Do you find that a standard acceptable?
Of course not, Congressman. And in fact, it's actually even worse than you described. There was exculpatory information available that was not considered. Some of the information that was considered, we now know from the Steele dossier was false.
That's right, and the list goes on.
But even beyond that, the fact is that individual American, that U.S. person, Carter Page, should not have been subject to that FISA surveillance because he was an individual who, this is all on the public record now, had cooperated with the CIA and the FBI in previous investigations. So he would, by the guidelines that existed then, he should have been excluded from FISA. He could have been directly interviewed.
That's right. Mr. Baker, I'm going to cut you off because you've made your point. Mr. Williams, do you think that, as I've described to you, 17 omissions, 51 wrong assertions in one FISA application is professionally done?
Sir, I would say that this is a matter that continues to be of interest to the
It's
Justice
a simple
Department.
question. Do you find that acceptable? I think it's hilarious that you won't say, no, I don't.
What I'm saying, sir, is that this is a matter before the Justice Department and Congress that has been ongoing for years.
Okay, so you won't answer the question.
What I will
If you
say
find
is
that
that it makes sense for you to direct the question to the Justice Department.
I'm asking your opinion. I'm not asking for any insight into their investigation. I'm asking for a simple opinion. Do you find that acceptable?
What I will say, as
Okay,
is
never
my
mind. You
opinion-
don't have to answer the question.
He's answered.
Because of this, the FBI initiated reforms. And you know what they were? Trainings. Here's some trainings for senior FBI officials. Training number 1, don't lie to FISA courts. Training number 2, don't make things up. How about training number 3, don't hide evidence. That's what senior officials in the FBI did. And if I wish I had more time, I'm almost out of time, because I would come to you and ask, first, Mr. Williams, I'd come back one more time and ask you if you find that acceptable or not, but we won't waste time with it. I would ask, how do we restore faith in the FBI? Because we want to trust the FBI. And people say you're going after the FBI. What nonsense. We're trying to protect the FBI. I know FBI agents who are deeply offended by what they see. They want us to hold them accountable, and that's what the committee is going to do. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It pays to do a lot of listening, and what I've heard is a lot of discussion about this memo. And we ought to really take a look at it. In fact, it's on the FBI website right now. You can pull it up as I talk. And, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter that memo into the record. Thank you. So what do we really have here? I've read the memo. I recommend we all do. It starts off in the first paragraph, making it perfectly clear that 1, the lawful First Amendment protection activity should never be subject to persecution, or prosecution. That's the free speech piece, right there in the very first paragraph of the memo. And 2, the actual issue of concern in this memo is the illegal violence, which has been discussed by several of you as totally illegal, or threats of violence. So let me be very, very clear here. We have myriad examples of extraordinary, serious, violent threats targeting school board officials that should be of concern to everyone in this room and all of my colleagues. Behind me are just 3 of the written examples that were of concern to the FBI. 1, quote, "It's too bad that your mama is an ugly communist whore. If she doesn't quit or resign before the end of the year, we will kill her. But first, we will kill you." It would seem to me that is a rather clear example of a violent expression of free speech, which is illegal. Also behind me is another written, this is why Hitler threw you, expletive, into the gas chamber. 3rd, we're coming after you, stinking traitors of America. This is what was out there in public school board meetings. I would love to show you the videos of those meetings, but we're not allowed to under the rules, apparently. But if we were to do that, we would have a rather clear and numerous examples of violent threats to school board members, teachers, administrators across this nation. This memo by the Attorney General, however it came to be, and that's been discussed here, that maybe somebody suggested that he take action on this, which is rather common. There's not one of us on this dais that hasn't been asked by one or more of our constituents to do something. And so the Attorney General does. He sends out a memo to the FBI agents across the country saying, bad things are going on. Or maybe I should just read it. Threats against public servants are not only illegal, they run counter to our nation's core values. Those who dedicate their time and energy to ensuring that our children receive a proper education in a safe environment deserve to be able to do their work without fear for their safety. That's the memo. That's what happened here. Is it the director noting, and I'm sure he had more than one source than the School Board Association, that there were things going on in our society that were dangerous? Ms. Parker, you spoke to the difference here between free speech and violent speech. This is what the FBI director did. He said to the agents, pay attention to this and keep track of it. Why? Why did he want them to do that? Because there were threats. Very real threats. Did any of them materialize? There's evidence that they did. You take a look across this country, the number of public servants that simply decided to not serve because of the violent threats. So as we go about our work here, as we go about looking at the weaponization of the federal government, we must be careful that we don't become a weapon to be used for political purposes. There clearly, absolutely is a need to monitor all federal agencies, law enforcement, military, on and on. But let's be very careful that we don't use this committee as a weapon for political purposes.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank the gentleman from Ohio. It occurs to me that we're sitting here in a committee that's got a fancy name, a different name. There are people watching our very first hearing and wondering, are these folks serious? There are people who have spent their careers dedicated to the service of people in this country, working at the FBI, wondering, are these folks serious enough that I could be a whistleblower, that I could come forward and share information with them and they would actually do something with it and that something good could come from it. And I want to let those people who are watching, Ms. Parker and Mr. Baker, you're an excellent example of people who will come forward and make a difference. And I want to let those people know that I've come to this city for 10 years with one basic premise, which is this is the best country on the planet, the best country that's ever been. It's deeply flawed, but we owe it to our children to fix it. And that's why I sought to be on this committee. That's why I thank you, Mr. Baker, and you, Ms. Parker, for being here, and why I invite others who are watching to please come to us. Find somebody on this dais that you trust and tell us your story so we can fix it. And speaking of fixing things, I want to talk about the FISA program, which, Mr. Baker, you've talked about in your testimony, particularly 702 parts of it that we are going to re-examine and reauthorize potentially. On the surface of it, it sounds like a practical legal concept that you would collect information on foreign targets who don't have constitutional rights, and you might incidentally collect information that pertains to U.S. citizens who do have constitutional rights. But because it was collected incidentally and not in pursuit of that U.S. person, oh, we'll go look at this data, we'll put some policies and procedures, but the Constitution does not apply here because it was incidentally collected. Well, if the incidental collection were small enough, that might be a valid concept. The problem is we've collected millions of exabytes of data. When what you're collecting incidentally becomes the entire universe, I think you might need a warrant to go look at that information. And when the number of searches that is done on U.S. persons by the FBI, I'm not talking about CIA, NSA, we know in 2020 it was over 1 million searches into this phishing, into this database where you don't need a warrant. And then in 2021, it went from 1 million to over 3 million searches. This is problematic, and I hope we look at this going forward. Mr. Baker, you mentioned something in your written testimony I don't think you got a chance to speak about here today. Can you tell us what reverse targeting is and
Yes.
why we might want to be concerned about that?
Yes, and it's not well understood, but in a nutshell, here it is. The CIA and the NSA are forbidden to target Americans, as you know. They often, and as you said, the numbers are in vast numbers where they pick up Americans most of the time just by incident.